So another society, another civilization that was kind of at a crossroads in this modern era was China. And so at the beginning of this era, China, remember, they were never isolated, but they did highly control trade. And so when the Europeans came to them seeking trade, they forced them to only trade at certain ports and were highly restricted on what they allowed in and out of China. And so Britain was forced to trade through the port at Canton. And at this time, China was still under the control of the Qing dynasty. And the Qing dynasty was, like the Ottoman Empire, beginning to decline a little bit. The bureaucracy had become too large, it had become very corrupt as well. And the Confucian examination systems that were used to train people for the bureaucracy, well, they were filled with cheating. And many people would buy positions in the government, or they would pay people to take the exams for them. And overall, this led to a bureaucracy that was filled with people that weren't really qualified for those positions. Furthermore, less and less money was being spent on maintaining our army and state projects. And so the Qing dynasty was beginning to decline. But when it came to trade, they still restricted Britain to trade at a single port at Canton. And Britain, for the whole previous era, had traded tons of silver to China, because that was the only thing that China wanted from Europe was silver, in exchange for those Chinese luxury goods like silk, porcelain, and tea. And so this was a trade relationship that existed between Britain and China. And Britain didn't like it. Britain wanted to reverse that favorable balance of trade. They were tired of all of their silver going to Chinese markets, and China wasn't really interested in any of the manufactured goods that Britain had to offer. And so to reverse this balance of trade, Britain decides to import opium to China. And opium becomes a serious threat to the Qing dynasty. And it begins small. In 1810, they began importing about 4,000 chests a year. Well, within a few decades, that number was up to over 40,000 chests of opium per year. And Britain would grow the opium in India because they could grow a stronger version of it there and then import it over to China. And by 1838, about 1% of China's population was addicted to opium. Now, that seems like a small number, but China had a huge population, over 400 million people. And so 1% of their population was addicted now to opium, over 4 million people addicted to opium. And this was creating huge economic and social problems. First off, it reversed that favorable balance of trade. And tons of silver now flooded out of China to Europe. Furthermore, ag production declined, opium dens spread, officials basically abandoned their work in favor of opium. And so it really was destroying China's economy and their society. And so the government realized they needed to put a stop to this opium trade. And so they send a commissioner, Lin Zhishuo, to try to stop the trade. And Lin was known for being uncorruptible. And so he goes in, and at first he tries to work with the British merchants to stop the trade. But when he doesn't have much success there, he confiscates the British opium and blocks British trading areas, destroys over 20,000 chests of opium, and Britain's going to respond with war and completely crushes China's outdated navy, destroys the Grand Canal, sends their gunboats up the Grand Canal. British army then invades, and China is forced to sue for peace. And so in suing for peace, China is basically forced to open up more trade to Britain. And Britain gains access to Hong Kong and 5 other ports as well. And following this, a second wave of wars is going to erupt, where other European countries become involved and they begin to force their hand in China as well. So what this is going to lead to is China forced into a series of unequal treaties. And soon, many European countries and the United States are basically granted trading rights in China. So initially, Britain was basically granted the right to trade their opium. They also opened 5 more ports for trade, and Britain was granted what they called most favored nation status, basically trade rights in China. They were also granted extraterritoriality, similar to what we saw in the Ottoman Empire, where foreign merchants didn't have to abide by Chinese laws and didn't have to pay Chinese taxes. And gradually, China is going to lose control of their own economy to foreigners. By 1900, over 90 ports were now under foreign control. And basically, what happens is China is divided into spheres of influence. Politically, the Qing dynasty remained in control, but economically, they lose control to outside nations. And they basically divide China into these zones, these spheres, and each European country kind of controlled a different sphere. And so Britain had a sphere. France is going to become involved. The United States becomes involved, and even Japan gets in on it as well. And so China's able to maintain control of their own government, but they lose control of their own economy.